Get her out of my kitchen." Harlan Dufresne said it loud enough for the whole prep room to hear. 7 cooks, 2 dishwashers, a sous chef, and the delivery driver who just walked in through the back. Nobody moved. Nobody looked up. Renee Beaumont stood at the stainless steel counter, by the walk-in cooler, her knife roll open in front of her, her hands flat on the surface. 61 years old, 40 years in professional kitchens, and right now, in this moment, she looked at the wall and said nothing. Harlan Dufresne crossed the kitchen in 4 steps. Executive chef of Saison, the most decorated restaurant in Montreal's Old Port. 38 years old, 3 Michelin stars on his CV from Paris, a magazine cover from last year, with the headline New Voice of Canadian Fine Dining. He stopped 2 feet from Renee and looked her up and down the way a man looks at something he's already decided is in the wrong place. "Who hired this?" He didn't ask her, he asked the room. A room full of people who suddenly found reasons to look at their cutting boards. His sous chef, Garrett Webb, stepped forward from the line. "Owner did. Seasonal consultancy. She's here through the fall menu." Harlan turned back to Renee. He read her coat. Old. The stitching around the cuffs worn through, repaired once, worn through again. Her knife roll was canvas, not leather. The kind of thing a culinary student picks up at a restaurant supply store in their 2nd year and never replaces because they're always spending money on something else. Consultancy. His voice carried the shape of a laugh without the sound of one. "And what exactly are you consulting on?" He picked up her knife roll by one strap, held it out at arm's length, let it swing once. "Is it how to cook with equipment from the last century?" Renee looked at the knife roll. She looked at his hand. She looked at his face. She said nothing. Harlan dropped it back on the counter. His voice dropped too, but not enough. Everyone in that kitchen heard every word. "Listen, I don't know what arrangement you made with whoever you made it with, but this is my kitchen. My kitchen runs a certain way. I don't do charity projects, and I don't babysit. If you can't keep up with this line, I want you gone before service. Are we clear?" 14 seconds of silence. Renee picked up her knife roll. She unrolled it slowly on the counter, the way someone does when they're not in a hurry and don't intend to be. She took out her first knife, held it to the light, set it in position. Then she looked at Harlan Dufresne for the first time. "Clear," she said. That was all. But here's what nobody in that kitchen knew. Nobody except the woman standing at that counter with 40 years in her hands and a knife she'd carried since, before Harlan Dufresne had ever set foot in a professional kitchen. Renee Beaumont had a secret, and in this building, in this city, her secret was hiding in plain sight. She didn't leave at the end of prep. She stayed through service. She worked the sauté station, the one Harlan had assigned her without explanation, the hardest position on the line during a Friday dinner rush. 140 covers, every plate moving at speed. She didn't talk unless spoken to. She didn't ask for help. She moved the way people move when they've stopped thinking about movement. The body just knows. Garrett Webb watched her from the pass for 40 minutes before he realized he was doing it. He'd been in professional kitchens for 12 years. He knew what competence looked like. He knew what it looked like when someone was faking it. Renee wasn't doing either of those things. She was doing something else. She was doing the thing that very few cooks ever learn, which is to disappear into the work so completely that the work stops being the thing you're doing and becomes the thing you are. At 9:15, a table 6 order came back. One of the servers, Jules, brought it to the pass. Lamb. The guest said it was under-seasoned. Harlan looked at the plate. He looked at Renee. He picked up the plate and walked it back to her station. She was mid-service, 4 tickets in the rail, 2 pans on the fire. He set the plate down on the counter beside her and said, quietly enough that only the 2 of them and Garrett could hear, "This is your work." Renee glanced at the lamb. She turned down the pan. She picked up a small spoon, tasted from the edge of the plate, set the spoon down. She said, "That's correct seasoning for the preparation. The sauce has white truffle and aged parmesan. Both carry their own salt load. Guest may have expected a heavier hand. That's a preference issue, not an error." Harlan stared at her. "If you want," she said, returning to her tickets, "I can walk the server through how to explain the dish before it leaves the pass. That usually resolves it." A long beat. Harlan picked up the plate and walked back to the pass without a word. After service, in the quiet of a kitchen being broken down, Garrett Webb stood near the sink watching Renee clean her station. He'd been trying to place her for 3 hours. There was something about the way she worked, the specific logic of how she moved through a busy service, the particular choices she made under pressure, that felt like something he'd read about rather than seen. He asked her how long she'd been cooking. She looked up. 42 years, she said. Give or take. He did the math in his head and came up short. He said, Where? She named 2 places, just the names. No elaboration. Garrett Webb's face did something involuntary, a small, private recalibration, because one of those places was a restaurant that didn't exist anymore. It had closed in 2008, but before it closed, it had been for 11 consecutive years the most awarded kitchen in Quebec, and it had been run by a woman who had trained almost every serious chef working in Eastern Canada for the past 2 decades, many of whom didn't know where they'd gotten their technique from, because it had passed through so many hands since. Garrett said, You worked under Genevieve Noel? Renee dried her knife, rolled it into its case. She said, I didn't work under her. I worked with her. We opened that kitchen together. She picked up her coat and her bag, and she walked out through the back door into the October air. Garrett stood at the sink for a long time after she left. Day 2. Renee arrived before anyone else. 6:45 in the morning. The kitchen was dark and cold, and she knew where the lights were because she'd noted them the day before. She started a mise en place for the afternoon prep, not because anyone had asked her to, but because after 42 years in professional kitchens, arriving and beginning are the same motion. At 7:30, Harlan Dufresne came through the back door. He stopped when he saw the lights on. He stopped again when he came through to the kitchen and saw what was on the prep table. Renee had broken down the fall menu. Not all of it, the components she'd been given access to, the ones she was here to consult on. She'd reconstructed each dish from its base. New acid balance on the beet course, a different fat ratio in the duck pressing technique that cut the preparation time by 40 minutes without changing the texture, and one dish she'd redesigned entirely, the venison. She'd pulled it apart, identified where the flavor was being lost in the preparation sequence, and rebuilt it from the sauce inward. She'd also written a note, single page, handwritten, clipped to the venison schematic. Harlan, the current sequence is losing the reduction at step 4. I've reordered the timing and changed the base stock to address it. Happy to walk you through the reasoning when you're ready. Harlan read the note standing up. He read it twice. Then he walked to the prep table and looked at what she'd done. He picked up the duck preparation schematic. He put it down. He picked up the venison redesign. His face didn't move. He folded the note, put it in his pocket, and went to his office without saying a word. At 9 o'clock, Garrett arrived. He saw the prep table. He looked at Renee, who was starting on the sauce work for afternoon service. How long have you been here? 6:45, she said. He nodded slowly. Did Harlan see this? He saw it. Garrett waited. And she turned down the flame on her pot. He took the note, she said. That afternoon, Harlan used the new venison sequence in service preparation without telling anyone he was using it. He presented the dish at the chef's meeting as a revised direction he'd been developing. 3 of the cooks nodded. One of them, a young woman named Thea, glanced at Renee across the kitchen. Renee was looking at her station. Garrett saw the glance. He saw Renee's face. He looked at his clipboard. After the meeting, Thea was washing down the grill station, she said quietly, without looking up. He used your dish. Renee dried her hands on a clean cloth. I know. Thea stopped scrubbing. Aren't you going to say something? Renee set the cloth down. She looked at the kitchen, the full width of it, 14 stations, 40 years of kitchens layered inside this one. She said, Not yet. Thea started scrubbing again. After a moment, she said, Why are you even here? You don't need this. Renee didn't answer right away. She looked at the window above the sink, the one that faced the courtyard, the one that let in the last of the afternoon light before the dinner rush swallowed it. Because someone asked me to be here, she said, and because I said yes. And those 2 things are still enough for me. Thea didn't say anything else, but that night, at the end of service, she made sure Renee's station was wiped down and restocked before she left. She didn't tell anyone she'd done it. She just did it. Day 3 started with a client tour. Cezanne had been shortlisted for a major Quebec Culinary Foundation grant, the kind of grant that funded kitchen expansions, mentorship programs, apprenticeship pipelines, the infrastructure of serious professional cooking. The foundation's director was coming through the kitchen at 11. Harlan had been preparing for this moment for 3 months. Renee was at her station, working on the acid reduction for the fall tasting menu, when Harlan came through with the foundation's director, a tall man in a gray suit named Lionel Cote, and 2 members of the selection committee. Harlan moved the group through the kitchen with the precision of a man who had rehearsed this. He described the kitchen's philosophy. He described the sourcing relationships with Quebec farms. He described the mentorship structure for young cooks. He stood at the pass and gestured, and the kitchen performed around him the way kitchens perform when they know they're being watched. They stopped at the prep line. Renee was there, working. Harlan glanced at her. He said, "To the group, we bring in experienced consultants for specific seasonal work." Outside perspective, he moved to continue. Lionel's looking at Renee. He tilted his head slightly. He said, "Excuse me, are you?" Renee looked up from her work. Lionel Cote took 1 step forward. He said, "Renee Beaumont?" She said, "Yes." He turned to the 2 committee members beside him. He said, in the quiet voice of a person making an announcement they hadn't expected to make, "This is the woman who wrote the Quebec Culinary Foundation's Professional Standards Training Manual, the one that every professional kitchen in the province has been using for the past 16 years. Nobody in the kitchen moved. Harlan Dufresne stood very still. Lionel Cote extended his hand to Renee. She shook it. He said, "I didn't know you were working here. We've been trying to get in touch with you for 6 months. We have a proposal we'd like you to consider." He paused.
Have you seen the chair posting we put up in the spring?
Renee said, "I saw it." Lionel Cote looked at the selection committee members. He looked at Harlan. He looked at Renee's station, her knife roll on the counter, the worn canvas, the work in front of her. He said, "We'd like you to chair the new Culinary Advisory Board, the one that determines funding allocation across the province. It carries a full budget and 2 staff positions." He paused again. "We're announcing the appointment next week. We hadn't found the right person." A breath. The kitchen held it collectively. "We'd like it to be you," he said. Renee looked at him. She set down her tool. She said, "Let me finish this reduction and we can talk." Lionel Cote smiled. He said, "Of course." He turned to the committee. He had the expression of a man who had just found something he hadn't expected to find. Harlan Dufresne's face had gone the color of the tile behind the sink. The committee stayed for 90 minutes. Renee left her station twice during that time, once to answer a question about provincial kitchen labor standards, once to clarify a point about apprenticeship certification pathways. Both times she answered from memory, precisely, without notes. Both times she returned to her station and continued working. Harlan spent those 90 minutes at the far end of the kitchen. He spoke when Lionel Cote addressed him directly. Otherwise, he looked at his clipboard. The clipboard that had nothing on it he needed to read. When the committee left, the kitchen stayed quiet for longer than it should have. Garrett Webb was the one who finally moved. He crossed to the pass, checked the ticket rail, called the line back into prep mode. Normal sounds resumed. But the silence had changed. It wasn't the silence before the committee arrived. It was the silence of a room full of people recalibrating in real time. Taya caught Renee's eye from across the kitchen. Renee gave her a small nod. That was all. At the end of prep, Harlan came to Renee's station. This was the first time in 3 days he had come to her side of the kitchen without a performance attached to it. No clipboard, no client watching, no point to make. He stood beside her station. He said, "I didn't know who you were." Renee kept her hands moving on the work. She said, "That's all right." He said, "The venison preparation. I should have." She looked at him, not with anger, with something quieter, which was worse. She said, "You should have. But here we are." A pause. He said, "I want to make it right." She looked at him for a long moment. She said, "Then make it right with Thea. She's been in this kitchen for 2 years and she hasn't been credited for a single thing she's contributed. Start there." That's what making it right looks like in a kitchen. Harlan looked across to where Thea was working. He looked back at Renee. He nodded once. That was the whole conversation. He walked back to his office. Renee went back to her reduction, but the nod wasn't nothing, and Renee knew it. The next morning, Harlan called a kitchen meeting before prep. Full staff. Everyone gathered at the pass. He stood at the front. He didn't have notes. He said, "I want to address something." He looked at the room. At Thea, who was in the second row with her arms at her sides, at Garrett, who had his eyes on the floor. At the 7 other cooks arranged around the station tables. He said, "The new fall venison dish was redesigned by Renee Beaumont, not by me. I presented it as mine, and that was wrong." He paused. "It won't happen again. And going forward, every dish development in this kitchen gets credited to whoever developed it. That includes past contributions." He looked at Thea, including the beet course, which I know was yours. The kitchen was still. Thea didn't move. Her jaw shifted slightly. One small thing. Then she nodded. Harlan turned to Renee. He said, "I owe you an apology." He said it plainly without decoration. Not the apology of a man performing accountability, but of a man who had been awake most of the night arriving at something true. The comment about the equipment on day 1. How I spoke to you in front of this kitchen. That was wrong. You deserved better, and this kitchen deserved better. Renee said, "Thank you." He said, "I'm asking you to stay through the winter menu." The room shifted. Renee looked at him. She looked at the kitchen, the full length of it. She looked at Thea, who was looking at the floor but whose shoulders had come down an inch. She looked at Garrett, who finally met her eyes. She said, "I'll stay." Harlan nodded. He said, "Prep starts in 15. He walked back to the line. The kitchen moved slowly, at first, then all at once. 2 weeks passed. Things changed, not with speeches, not with a posted memo. With the small structural changes that either happen in a kitchen or don't, and when they do, everyone feels them without necessarily being able to name them. Thea was credited on the new fall menu for 3 dishes. In print, the copies went to the guests and the trade press. Renee was listed as senior culinary consultant on Sasson's autumn materials. Her name, her full name, Renee Beaumont, appeared below Harlan's. The foundation board appointment was announced the following Tuesday. The email went out from the Quebec Culinary Foundation's office at 9 in the morning. By noon, Garrett had seen it, shared in 4 separate industry channels. By evening, 2 other Montreal restaurants had sent congratulatory messages to the foundation, both of them mentioning they'd trained under chefs who'd trained under Beaumont's manual. Harlan saw the email. He read it twice. He didn't delete it. He printed it and put it on the staff announcement board in the kitchen, next to the schedule and the sourcing calendar. No note, no context. Just the announcement, posted where everyone could read it. Garrett saw it there the next morning. He didn't say anything to Harlan. He went to the coffee station, poured a cup, and handed it to Renee when she walked in. She looked at the board. She read her name. She looked at the cup in her hand. "Good coffee," she said. He said, "I know." She took a sip. She set her bag down. She started her prep. On her last official day of the fall consultancy, the kitchen made her a meal. Not a formal thing, not planned. Thea had brought in something from her grandmother's recipe, a dish from Martinique. And somewhere between the prep and the service it became a group effort. Everyone adding to the table in the back corner of the kitchen, the one that nobody ever used because nobody ever had a reason to stop. Renee sat at that table for 45 minutes. She ate, she listened. She talked about kitchens she'd worked in that no longer existed. She talked about Genevieve Noel and how she'd made coffee on a 2-burner camp stove the morning they opened for the first time. She talked about the year she almost quit cooking entirely, 1998, a year she didn't explain and nobody asked her to. Thea asked her what had made her stay. Renee set down her fork. She thought about it genuinely, the way someone thinks about something that requires them to actually find the answer rather than retrieve it. She said, "A woman I had never met left a review in the paper about a dish I'd made. She said it was the first time in her life she'd felt her grandmother's kitchen in a restaurant. She never knew I existed. She never knew I cooked it, but she felt it. She said, I decided that was enough. Just that. It was enough." The table was quiet for a moment. Thea said softly, "That's a good reason." Renee picked up her fork again. she said. It still is. That night, after service, after the kitchen had been broken down, and the lights had gone off in sections the way they always did, Renee stood in the back corridor pulling on her coat. Harlan Dufresne came through the door from the dining room. He was still in his whites. He stopped when he saw her. He said, "I'll walk you out," she said. "You don't have to," he said. "I know." They walked out through the back into the October air. The lane behind the restaurant was quiet. The light from the kitchen door made a yellow rectangle on the wet pavement. Harlan said, "The things I said to you on day one, I've thought about them every day since," she said. "Good." He looked at her. She looked at him, not unkindly. She said, "You're a good chef, Harlan. You're going to become a better one. But not because of the stars. Because of what you did in that kitchen 2 weeks ago. That was harder than anything in a Michelin guide." He absorbed that, she said. "Good night." She walked out of the yellow light and into the street. Harlan stood at the kitchen door and watched her go. He stood there for a while after she'd turned the corner. Then he went back inside and turned off the last light. Here's what I keep thinking about when I tell you this story. Renee Beaumont walked into that kitchen with 42 years of work and a canvas knife roll that had been repaired twice. She could have said who she was in the first 30 seconds. She could have named the manual. She could have made one phone call that would have changed the room completely. She didn't. Not because she was patient in the way people mean when they use the word to praise someone for absorbing things they shouldn't have to absorb, but because she had already decided, a long time ago, that her work was the answer. Not her credentials, not her name, her work. And she was right. She was also wronged. Both of those things are true, and they don't cancel each other out. The people in that kitchen who looked at their cutting boards on day one, who said nothing, who heard everything and kept moving. Most of them are still there, still cooking. I wonder sometimes what they carry from that morning, what it costs a person to witness something and choose silence, because it's not free, it never is. What Harlan Dufresne did 2 weeks later was not enough, and it was also the most important thing he did in his professional life. Those two things can both be true. Here's the question I want to leave you with. You don't have to be the one with the authority to fire someone. You don't have to be the foundation director. You don't have to be anyone remarkable. You just have to be the person who's standing in the kitchen when someone picks up that knife roll and holds it out like it's something to be ashamed of. What do you do with that moment? Do you look at your cutting board? Or do you look up? Leave your answer in the comments. Share this with someone who's been in that kitchen. And subscribe, because next week we're telling another story that deserves to be heard.